They spent millions bringing in experts from around the world. Engineers with degrees from MIT, Oxford, Tokyo. But not one could get the Navy's prized warship engine to roar again. The brass was ready to scrap it until the Admiral made one. Final call. When a quiet black Navy veteran in a worn cap stepped aboard, everyone laughed. Until the ground trembled. What he did next shook the entire fleet. You'll never forget this story. Stay till the end and don't forget to hit subscribe for more mind-blowing true stories. The unfixable heart of steel, the USS Patriot, a 90,000-ton beast of war and technology, sat idle at Naval Station Norfolk, its colossal frame casting a dead shadow across the dockyard. For 2 years, the Navy's most expensive vessel, boasting the world's most advanced multi-fuel hybrid propulsion engine, had been sidelined due to a mysterious malfunction that baffled the planet's finest minds. Mechanical engineers from Germany, Japan, the UK, and the US had pored over its schematics, its coils, its turbines, yet no one could diagnose why it refused to power past 13% without overheating and shutting down. It was a catastrophe in slow motion. The Pentagon fumed. Commanders cursed. Naval pride was hemorrhaging. Whispers circulated that sabotage had occurred during testing. But the internal reviews turned up nothing. The engine just didn't work. Every week, new contractors came with promises and left with red faces and empty hands. "We built a battleship that can't battle," joked a bitter technician. Morale plummeted, money bled. War games had to be simulated instead of sailed. Pressure mounted at the top, and that's when Admiral Patrick Harlan, hard-faced, gray-templed, and known for unorthodox instincts, made a decision that stunned the upper brass. "Call up George Maxson," he ordered quietly. "Sir, the guy from the 80s?" a young officer asked. "He's retired, off-grid." "Exactly," the Admiral replied, eyes steely. "He's not like them. He understands engines like they're alive." Maxson wasn't in any phone book. Not anymore. A tracker had to be hired to locate him in a remote Alabama town, where he lived in a house that leaned sideways and kept his tools in a shed with no lock. When 2 Navy jeeps pulled up, kids on bikes scattered. George Maxson, now in his late 60s, emerged wearing a denim shirt stained with grease and a ball cap that read USS Warden Engine. "Room Chief." The officer introduced himself. "Sir, Admiral Harlan is requesting your help." "Classified engine issue." George lit a cigarette. "You telling me the million-dollar brains can't fix it?" The officer nodded grimly. "Then it ain't a brain problem. It's a soul problem," George muttered. He packed his bag when George Maxson stepped onto the deck of the USS Patriot with a limp in his left leg and calloused hands that looked like they hadn't known lotion since 1991. The shipyard was crowded with skeptical glances and barely hidden chuckles. "They brought a dinosaur?" One contractor muttered to another, "That engine's newer than his last paycheck." George ignored them. He didn't carry a laptop. He didn't even take notes. Instead, he listened to the ship, his knuckles tapped the steel walls. His ears leaned into the hums and silences, and his fingertips glided over the seams of the engine's belly like a doctor diagnosing a patient. "It ain't about the manuals," he said to the engineers who followed him like doubters trailing a prophet. "These ships talk, you just don't know their language." Within hours, George found things that had been overlooked. A barely audible vibration in the secondary shaft that no one noticed. A minuscule delay in coolant cycle resonance. A change in oil temperature gradient that even sensors ignored. He muttered to himself, "Someone rebuilt this like they were baking a cake from 10 recipes. No rhythm, no feel." Still, the expert scoffed. "With all due respect, Mr. Maxson, the data disproves your assumptions," said a young British engineer. George leaned in, smiled, and replied, "Son, I was fixing engines when your mama was still trying to teach you how to hold a fork. Data don't fix what instincts detect." The Admiral stood by him like a general behind his last champion. Give him full access, whatever he wants. George requested a welding torch, a thermal resonance tuner he built himself in 1984. And strangely, jazz music piped into the engine room. "Ships don't like silence," he said. As the old Navy vet worked, something strange happened. The ship responded. Pressures stabilized. The power curve normalized. Crew members who doubted him started hanging back, watching, whispering. He's doing something real. On the 5th day, George called for a full systems test. The room filled with tension. The brass doubted. "We've done this before engine stalls at 13%. George simply said, "Let's roll." They did. 10%, 11%, 12%, 13%. The room tensed. 14%, 15%, 20%. The vibrations held steady. 30%, 40%, 60%. A crew member screamed, "It's stable." Cheers erupted. The Admiral grinned for the first time in weeks. "How?" asked an engineer. George simply said, "Because I didn't fix the engine. I listened to it." But he wasn't done. "You've got something deeper wrong. Sabotage, maybe. Let me keep digging." As George dove deeper into the diagnostic systems and control modules, he discovered something that chilled him more than any busted coil or stripped valve software irregularities that weren't accidental. Someone had embedded a corrupt loop in the engine's control system, triggering intentional overheating at higher power levels. This wasn't bad design, he told the Admiral. This was deliberate. The Admiral's face hardened. "You're saying we were hacked?" George shook his head. "Not hacked. Inside job." A quiet investigation unfolded. Access logs were pulled, security tapes unearthed, and suddenly a name emerged. Commander Brian Keller, former project overseer who resigned abruptly last year. When confronted, Keller tried to flee but was intercepted at the base gate. Under interrogation, he cracked. He had been paid by a private defense contractor, Oratech Systems, to ensure the Navy's flagship failed, so they could push their competing prototype forward. "You almost cost lives, reputation, and peace," the Admiral seethed. George stared at the traitor. "You may have built the future on paper, son, but you sold your soul for dollars." Keller was court-martialed. The scandal rocked headlines. George was offered everything: contracts, positions, medals. He refused most. "Just named the engine after my mother, Emma. She taught me how to listen before anyone cared what I heard." They did. The engine was renamed the Emma Drive. George stayed an extra week, training young mechanics not in code or formulas, but in touch, rhythm, and trust. Every machine's got a heartbeat. Find it, feel it, then fix it. Months later, the USS Patriot sailed at full power through the Atlantic, engines humming like a jazz quartet, stronger than ever before. The ship passed inspection, completed drills, and rejoined the fleet as the pride of the Navy. George returned to Alabama quietly, but word spread. Young recruits would whisper his name. A black veteran from a forgotten era who silenced computers with a wrench and instinct. One day, a new recruit found him tinkering with a pickup truck. "Sir, are you really the George Maxon?" George laughed. "Depends who's a skin. They say you brought a dead warship back to life." George wiped grease from his hands. "Naw, son. I just reminded it how to breathe." The Navy later dedicated a wing of their engineering school in his name. But George never showed for the ceremony. Instead, he mailed them an old jazz CD with a note: "Let the machines hear music, and let the people listen harder." And somewhere, deep in the belly of the USS Patriot, a small speaker still plays that very same tune, as the Emma Drive purrs alive, understood, and unforgettable.